Hello everyone and welcome to a very interesting game from round 6 of the 2019 Isle of Man Chess.com Swiss tournament. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Alexei Shirov. Alexei Shirov, after he lost to Fabiano Caruana in round 3 after that roller coaster game, won 2 very nice games, and now he again catches up to the leaders and he now faces the world champion. So without further ado, let's just check it out as it is a very interesting game. So Carlsen with the white pieces opens with e4, again showing that he's up for a good fight, with e5 by Shirov, knight to f3, and now knight to f6. Shirov goes for the Petrov defense. With d4 by Carlsen, the Steinitz attack, knight captures on e4, and now bishop to d3, the standard idea. With d5 and now grabbing his pawn back with knight captures on e5. We have knight to d7 by Shirov, knight to c3 by Carlsen, and now knight captures on e5. We have d captures on e5 and also a trade on c3. Knight captures, b captures, and already as of move 8, all knights are gone from the board. With bishop to e7 preparing to castle, and both players castle. Now we have castles, and f4 by Carlsen. And here, not allowing further expansion, Shirov pushes f5 himself, where you don't really gain anything by capturing en passant, and other than that, you've pretty much done a good job closing in white's bishop pair. So bishop to e3, Carlsen continues development, and now we have, following basically the same game Nikita Vityugov had against Wesley So in the World Cup. I think we covered that game. Vityugov won a very nice game, but in that game bishop to e6 was played by Wesley, and here c5 is a move that Shirov chooses, and it is a new move. So already as of move 11, we have a completely new game with no knights on the board. Bishop back to e2 by Carlsen, as you're not waiting for something like this to happen, not at the moment, but you always have to keep an eye on it. So bishop back to e2, Carlsen now wants to remaneuver this bishop to f3 to go for the d5 pawn. Bishop to e6, developing, also adding another defender to the d5 pawn, and now bishop to f3. Queen to d7, just developing, connecting rooks, and now a4 by Magnus. We have rook a to d8, and here queen to e2, getting the queen away from the d file, and queen to c7. Queen to c7 with some very tricky ideas. Shirov here is preparing to push g5 at some point, and with g5 in place, white will not be able to capture because of queen captures on e5, or rather white will be able to capture, but Shirov will get a very interesting game. Rook f to b1, Carlsen transfers the rooks over to the queen side, and now b6, not allowing any ideas on the queen side. And here, as the b file is now pretty much closed, Carlsen shifts the rook over to d1. So rook to d1, and here Shirov couldn't take this slow maneuvering game any longer, and he decided to play some real chess, and he played g5. So here you could capture on g5, for example, pawn captures, and then you have to calculate ideas like queen captures on e5. Also, f4 is a very sneaky move, so now the bishop no longer guards the g5 pawn. You can only then recapture it after that. So a lot of very complicated positions can happen if Carlsen decides to capture on g5, and you don't want to play positions like that against Alexei Shirov, especially if he maybe had this or similar positions at home on the board. So Carlsen just plays h3. He prepares. He prevents g4, also he doesn't mind just pawn captures, because after bishop captures, d5 pawn is nicely protected. We have rook to d7, now preparing to double up rooks on the d file, hopefully push d4 at some point, and Carlsen does the same. Rook to d2, now Carlsen is preparing rook a to d1. Rook f to d8, and Carlsen also doubles up on the d file, rook a to d1 to counter the d4 threat. And g4 now, sorry, not the g4, g captures on f4. First grabbing a pawn, with bishop captures on f4, and now that the bishop no longer guards the d4 square, now Shirov takes this opportunity to push d4. And already you can see that a lot is happening on the board with all through this idea of Shirov pushing g5. Now, you know, things are in motion, and Carlsen plays queen to f2. It's a very sneaky idea. For example, now d captures on c3 looks like a very nice idea, but d captures on c3, Carlsen had in mind queen to g3 check, and after the king moves, rook captures on d7, rook captures back, and now do you see what Carlsen's idea was? I'll give you a couple of seconds just for you to spot it. For those of you who were able to do that, congratulations on finding a beautiful rook lift. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook to d6. And now the point is the king is stuck here. And if you capture the rook, if you don't capture it, then you're just going to lose the bishop. The point is you cannot move this bishop, because then Carlsen plays e6, he frees up this diagonal, and then the bishop can claim the e5 square for his bishop, and that's game over for black. So you kind of have to capture the rook. After bishop captures, e captures. Now you don't really have a good move. Bishop to e5 is coming. Also your queen is under attack. You could try rook to g7 to try to give back the piece and trade queens, as the bishop is covering the queening square, but the problem is Carlsen has bishop to e5 here, and now you don't really have a good move. Queen d7 blocking, but now this crazy maneuver, bishop c6, you cannot capture because queen captures with checkmate, so you have to move the queen, and now another crazy maneuver, bishop to d5, getting rid of this bishop's control of the d7 square. You cannot allow bishop captures here, because if queen captures again, you're getting checkmated. So if pawn captures, now you just play bishop captures with check, queen captures, king captures, and just d7, and the black king is too far to stop promotion. So that's what Carlsen had in mind with this queen to f2 move. Of course, Shirov spotted it. He plays king to h8, doesn't allow this to come with check. And king to h1 by Carlsen, also improving the position of his king, as the dark square bishop is still on the board. You don't want your king on the same diagonal as your queen if the position opens up. Queen to c8 by Shirov, now getting the queen out of this diagonal, and king to h2 now by Carlsen. And here, the time on the clock is quite different than what you would expect. It's 52 minutes Carlsen and only 11 minutes for Shirov, or maybe you've expected it. I don't know what you guys were expecting. But here, Shirov abandons his control of the d file and he plays rook to g8. He shifts the attack over to the king side and sort of tries to trick Carlsen, because here you cannot capture on d4, or maybe you can. Because that's exactly what Carlsen did. He played c captures on d4 after Shirov recaptured. Carlsen now just played rook captures on d4 and allowed this bishop to c5 move. Of course, Shirov traded once, rook captures, and Carlsen recaptures with the rook. He could capture with the queen, but it's a bit of a passive idea. After rook goes back, you have to go back with the queen, queen f2, and now, for example, if the rooks are traded, you have this, well, you're still up a pawn, but it's hard to say. It's a pretty crazy position. So here, Carlsen played a more solid line after rook captures. He played rook captures on d4. He allows bishop to c5, and here Carlsen played c3, with the idea that if bishop captures, Carlsen just gets a beautiful pawn center. But there was also this queen to h4 move, which is really interesting. It goes after the queen to f6 check. So the point is, after bishop captures on d4, you get queen to f6 check, rook to g7, and now bishop to h6, threatening mate. And after the queen defends this, now you play bishop captures on g7, queen captures, and queen to d8 check, and now you just pick up this bishop. So queen g8, queen captures on d4, and you get a similar position. White is still up a pawn, but black is really passive here. You can never move the queen away from the queen and bishop's control of the d5 square. For example, if you can get this bishop to d5 and capture here, if the queen comes somewhere like d6, you're going to start pushing this pawn. It's a very easy win for white. So here it would be really tough, a really passive position for black. But Carlsen decides to go for the, like we mentioned, more solid c3. And okay, Shirov says, yeah, okay, I see what you did there, you know, pretty good stuff. Bishop captures on d4, c captures on d4, and now what do you play here? Shirov played queen to d7. Of course, you cannot allow d5. If d5 happens, it's game over. So queen to d7, blocking the d pawn, and here the time situation on the clock is 15 minutes Carlsen and 4.5 minutes for Shirov. And here, what do you play? Carlsen decided, well, you either have to choose against between h4, h5, and h6, or queen to d2, the move Carlsen played. Now, again, preparing pawn to d5, and you have to be careful on how you stop it. For example, rook to d8 does prevent d5, but it doesn't prevent bishop to g5. Now you're just lost. You have to move the rook. It's a pretty silly idea. And once you move the rook, just d5, and you win the game. E6 is coming next. You're going to remaneuver the bishop here. It's a complete annihilation. So, after queen d2, bishop to d5 by Shirov, and now comes the move Carlsen had in mind. If he didn't have this move, I'm sure he would have gone for the queen h5 line we discussed, but here Carlsen plays e6. It's a nice pawn sacrifice. He clears the e5 square for his bishop. We have queen captures on e6, and now bishop to e5 with check. Rook has to block, and now what do you play here? Queen to c3. Carlsen now wants to get the queen, well, to the back rank if possible. A big mistake would be something like queen to g5, like threatening checkmate, but I'm sure you'll see why it's a pretty big mistake. Even feel free to pause the video if you don't, because it's you know, something like this could happen in your own games. So for those of you who found it, congratulations on punishing white for such a silly mistake that didn't actually happen in the game. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, queen captures on e5. I know you all saw that. D captures, and now you just pick up the queen, and well, white will recapture the bishop, but after f4, you're picking up this pawn, and it's a completely winning endgame for black. You're up the exchange, you're up a pawn. Well, you will be up a pawn. There's no way to prevent that, and it will be an easy win for black. So, after rook g7, Carlsen decides for queen to c3, and now we have bishop captures on f3, getting rid of this bishop. Also, there is this threat of just bishop captures on d5. Once the queen captures, you will no longer be controlling c8, just queen c8 wins the game. So, Shirov trades, bishop captures, queen captures, and now, what do you play here? The threat is queen to a8 check, and it's not all that easy. For example, if you try to unpin, white will not go for the rook. White will still go for this queen to a8 check, and after king to f7, now you just play queen captures on a7, and you're either winning the rook here, or if queen blocks, you're just winning, well, you will be up a piece at the end of this very nice line. But there is one other move. It's a brilliant defensive resource. So Carlsen is threatening queen to a8 check, but also if the queen goes back to defend the back rank, you have to give up the f5 pawn. So what else is there? It's really just a powerful move. But again, feel free to pause the video and try to find this defensive resource Shirov had in this position. While I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to see it and find it, it's really just a disgusting engine move. So if you spotted it, congratulations. The point is you have to combine the two ideas: how to prevent this and the queen captures if the queen moves. Well, just give up a different pawn. It's h5, and this really saves black a lot of trouble. For example, queen captures on h5 with check, king to g8, now you've unpinned, white has to capture the rook now, bishop captures, king captures, and now black has some ideas of queen d6 check, followed by queen captures here. Also, the a4 pawn is a bit weak. Black also has some plans of a6 followed by b5 to create a pass pawn on the queen side. So here, for example, if queen d1, just keeping an eye on this pawn here, you play a6, you're going to push b5, create a pass pawn here, and you have some very nice counter-attacking chances. So this was really a sneaky idea that did not happen over the board. Shirov played queen to e8. He decided to give up this pawn, but he will claim the a4 pawn for himself. So Carlsen captured it, queen captures, and now king to g8. You cannot allow any checks while the rook is pinned. And now Carlsen has to decide whether he wants to play queen to f6 or just capture it right away. If queen f6, you have to move rook here, and now okay, you do get the h8 square, king f7, queen captures here, but then after king to e6, you've grabbed another pawn. Now it's 4 pawns against 2, but black still has a rook, so white is better here, there's no doubt about that. But it just seems like a more complicated position than the one Carlsen chooses. He plays bishop captures on g7, just go straight into the queen and pawn endgame, being up a pawn. So king captures on g7, queen to g5 check by Carlsen, king to f8, and now queen to f4 with check. With king to e7, if you block with the queen, also possible, then for example, if queen f7, then just king g3. Of course, Carlsen wants Shirov to capture so he can improve the position of his king, and it's still a king and pawn endgame where you are down a pawn. Would be very hard for black to play this. So he tried king to e7, but now Carlsen plays queen to e4 check, king f8, and he just captures the h7 pawn. And Shirov decides to capture on a4. Queen captures on a4. And with this move, we reach move 40. Both of them reach time control. They are given additional time. And Carlsen is still up a pawn. But on the other hand, Shirov has two connected pass pawns on the queen side. Carlsen goes for queen to f5 check with king to g7, queen to e5 check, king to f7, and here Carlsen played h4, and well, here Shirov started thinking, and after thinking for I believe some 17 minutes, it was in this position that Alexei Shirov resigned the game. You might think that it's a bit of a premature resignation, but in this top-level chess, it's not, because Shirov knows that this is winning, and it's winning if White plays the best moves, and he respects Carlsen to think that he will play the best moves. And I think that Shirov just wasn't he wasn't satisfied the way he played. He didn't he wasn't able to create something, but it's hard to create something against Carlsen. I think Carlsen was actually very happy when Shirov played g5. I think Carlsen just thought to himself, oh great, it's not me who will be trying this game. You try, and then I'll just play, just try and play best moves and see what happens. So I think Carlsen doesn't mind playing positions where he's the one who's under attack, but and he doesn't get shaken psychologically easily, which is something that Shirov can really achieve, in other players. So here we could play it out a bit more. For example, if queen c6, you bring the queen back into the game. d5 is coming, queen d7, now h5, and it will be very hard to stop both of them. So I think the Norwegian supercomputer said like it was a total domination for White, like a mate in 100 moves, saying that even if Black plays whatever, it's still going to be just winning. And like I said, Shirov doesn't want to play this out and maybe hope Magnus will blunder or try. He will try tomorrow in a new game where he will then try to create something else, as he always does. So yeah, a very nice win by Carlsen, and we're not gonna show the standings or mention the standings just yet, as I am about to show another game from round 6. But the link in the description below takes you to the standings, so feel free to check them out for yourselves if you just want to do it now. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Hamid Mazuji for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this very nice tournament, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and of course, whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.